Now for more on this, we have with us Mr. Adam Schwartz, writer and political commentator, joining us live from London. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Now to begin with, just for better understanding here, what's your assessment of the current political landscape?
Well, I think ultimately, we're sort of generally looking forward to the general election. Rishi Sunak seems to have sort of banked his premiership on the assumption that by giving himself the most amount of time in government, by having the latest general election as possible, probably towards the end of next year, he really gives himself enough time to really fix the main issues that are kind of facing the British electorate and the country as a whole, particularly related to the economy and on public services. I think sort of the fundamental problem that Rishi Sunak faces is that actually those issues that he needs to fix really don't have any kind of quick fix solutions and are in fact very much rooted in sort of long-term problems and structural issues. I mean, if you simply look at issues in the public sector, if we look at the National Health Service, if we look at the recent issues of schools not being maintained and failures in prisons, as you mentioned in your report, they're really related to the kind of long-term problem of the deliberate shrinking of the state that sort of happened during the David Cameron era. Now, the problem with that is that it's very difficult to suddenly build back a lot of state capacity. I think if you look at some of the other issues, for example, in the economy to do with inflation, those are and the impact on on mortgage rates. That's something that's very difficult as well to kind of sort in a short or even a medium-term time frame. If you look at issues to do with trade and the frictions caused by Brexit, again, those are due to kind of structural economic issues that can't simply be resolved in the period of a year. So I think really that's the major problem kind of facing Sunak in this kind of final year that we're having towards the general election. And I think really that's why we see Labour leader Keir Starmer trying to sort of pin him down as an inaction man, because really Rishi Sunak has tried to present himself as the professional, as the technocrat who's come in after a very difficult period in government with Boris Johnson and a short time as Liz Truss. So that's really, I would say that the fundamental issue kind of facing the British political landscape.
All right. And now that being said, now, as I mentioned, opposition MPs, they came down hard on Sunak, saying that the Prime Minister was to be blamed for the soft stance against Russia and the G20 leaders' declaration. Now, what would you say? How do you think that would impact the general elections, if at all?
I actually don't think it really will have a major impact on the general election. Or I think obviously, Starmer is going to highlight that, seeing as it was a major issue of the past week, to try to sort of cast Rishi Sunak as not quite as the competent professional leader as he presents himself. I think the reality is that, the British public do care about foreign policy issues. And obviously, the British public still maintain very strong support for Ukraine in its context of the Russian invasion. But the reality is that the UK's domestic problems, particularly with the economy and with inflation, means that those really are the pressing issues for the public when it comes to actually voting. And I think if we look at the polling that's taken place really during the time that Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister over the last year or so, really, the priorities of the British public haven't really changed. And so I don't imagine that, issues related to the G20 will really become a major issue. I think that one area where that is perhaps related is the fact that, a lot of global growth opportunities happen internationally. And so if Sunak can try to harness some of that, I think that's something that could potentially help him out. But overall, I don't think it's going to be the major defining issue that determines his success at the next election.
All right. Mr. Schwartz, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast with your insights on this.
Good to be with you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.